So here's $1 million question. How do I know if I'm an alcoholic? How do I know if a loved one is showing signals that they might have a problem with alcohol? That is the question we're going to be asking and hopefully answering today. Hi, and welcome back to my channel, The Wandering Wanderer. And I'm your host, Wendy. And today we're diving into an important topic: the signs and symptoms of alcoholism. Now, before you go pointing at people and telling them they're alcoholics because of the things I'm about to list, please remember that these signs and symptoms are in conjunction with the use of alcohol, the continuous use of alcohol. Don't be walking into people's houses accusing them of being alcoholics, okay? Thank you. All right. We know by now that alcoholism, also known as alcohol use disorder, is chronic, it's progressive, and that it has serious consequences if left unchecked. In case you missed our initial discussions, I encourage you to please watch our previous episodes for more insight. Last week, I shared my experience, and a lot of the symptoms that we'll be talking about are symptoms I was able to see in myself, but also in others. And by being able to recognize these signs and symptoms is a first step towards seeking help for ourselves and for maybe our loved ones who might want to begin the journey to sobriety but don't know how. I can tell you that it is my friends who saw things in me before I could ever have seen them. And sometimes when you are outside of the situation, you're more better able to see what's going on with somebody than they themselves are able to. And that's why watching out for these signs and symptoms is so important, because the Bible says you're your brother's keeper. And sometimes that's what it is. It's seeing somebody going down a path and being able to say, hey, hold on a minute. I think this path you're on is not the greatest. Now, I'm not saying that's always going to work. I'm not saying you're always going to be right. Maybe somebody has another problem that's not addiction. But being able to see it, being able to catch it, and also being able to create an environment where that person feels seen and heard and not judged and not accused when you approach them initially to have that first conversation, right? Now, having said that, let's remember that alcoholism affects different aspects of an individual: behavioral, physical, emotional, and psychological. I should add that these are not all the symptoms that are there. So if you can think of any symptoms that I don't mention, please, comments, bring them into the comments and let's talk about them. All right. So the first set of symptoms that I'm going to talk about are behavioral. These are how people behave that might give you a bit of a hint that they are addicted to alcohol or suffering from alcoholism. Please remember, these behavioral changes are in tandem with alcohol use, not independent. The first one is increased tolerance to alcohol. So if you and your friends have been hanging out and you guys have been doing 2, 3 beers, 2, 3 shots, and everything is fine, and you have that one friend who keeps upping the ante every single time, they keep being able to drink more and more and more and get drunk less faster, then they're developing a tolerance for alcohol. And maybe we need to keep an eye on that. If it's yourself, if you have the self-awareness to catch yourself at that, keep an eye on it. Question why you need so much more to drink to be able to get to the point where you feel like you are getting the fun or the pleasure out of it. It's a very important thing to be able to do that. And unfortunately, it's hard for us to self-check. And so maybe that's where your friends and loved ones come in. When you need to drink more and more to get the same effects over and over again, then you might want to ask yourself, am I on the right path? Am I drinking more than I should? And ask yourself why. It's not really a matter sometimes of just stopping. It's asking yourself, why do I need so much? Why do I push so hard? Or why do I keep needing to do more to get to the same place? Number 2, drinking alone or in secret is another sign and symptom. It's associated with the shame. And when one begins to feel the need to drink in secret because they don't want to be judged as drinking too much, we might need to question ourselves at that point and ask ourselves why we want to do it. Number 3 might strike people a little bit odder. But the third sign and symptom of that drinking might starting to become a problem for you is when you need excuses to drink. So this one time, I was talking to a friend of mine. I happen to be a life coach on top of everything else that I do. I'm also a certified life coach. And one time I was talking to actually an acquaintance of mine. She's not a client, but she's an acquaintance of mine. And I asked her, we were having a chat because she was saying she wanted to think about stopping to drink. And I said, maybe the first question is ask yourself why you drink. And she said, it gives me the weekend feeling. And so here's my question to her, and maybe it's the same question to you. Why does it have to be alcohol that gives you the weekend feeling, right? Why is it that alcohol is the one that instigates or sort of begins your weekend? Is it just societal? Is it just cultural? Or is it time for you to ask yourself why every weekend must begin or end with alcohol? Another thing I hear a lot of is, yeah, but how do you have fun without alcohol? I hate to break it to you, but people have a lot of fun, alcohol not included. It's just that we've been culturalized and sort of grown in this society where alcohol is sort of the key to having fun because it unlocks our inhibitions. But maybe that's a question we need to ask ourselves. If you really need alcohol to do it, should you be doing it in the first place? Just a question. Hey, just a question. All right. The fourth sign, behaviorally, is when people neglect their responsibilities at work, at school, or at home due to alcohol use. And so, if these people continue to drink regardless of the consequences of alcoholism, when they have legal problems or relationship problems and they are refusing to deal with those issues and constantly choosing drink or choosing drinking or choosing hanging out with friends who are drinking while they drink and refusing, not really refusing, but more of neglecting their roles at home, neglecting their roles in the office, calling in sick all the time. Point of fact, and I digress, but point of fact is alcohol related absences cost workplaces across the world over $18 billion a year in terms of absences. That should tell you something. And so it is time to ask yourself when you choose going to the bar over going home and spending some time with your kids, or going home to spend some time with that wife you're not sure you like or don't like as much anymore, maybe you need to ask yourself why alcohol is such an attractive allure for you and your home no longer is, and whether you should be trying to figure out how to make your home a little more interesting place for you to want to go to, as opposed to running to the bar and avoiding dealing with the issues that you probably need to deal with. That's just my random thoughts. Let's go back to what we were talking about. Next, let's talk about the physical signs and symptoms of alcoholism and overaddiction. Again, don't go accusing people when you see these signs unless you see them in congruence with alcohol addiction. Unfortunately, you're going to see the psychological signs, you're going to see the signs I've just spoken about behaviorally before you see the physical signs, because unfortunately and sadly, a lot of the physical signs start showing up when addiction has really set in. When the brain chemistry has been affected, when the liver has been affected, that's when some of these signs and symptoms start showing up. And by then, you're really, really way down the path. And so physical signs and symptoms should probably be the last in this category. The first is blackouts and memory lapses after drinking. I shared this with you last week when I was talking about my experiences, that while I was awake for a lot of the drinking sessions and I was out, at some point of the night, my brain would just shut down. And the next morning, I would have voids and gaps that most of us don't talk about. When somebody's like, oh, last night was so much fun. You might not remember what last night was like, but you're like, yeah, last night was so much fun. We should do it again. And that means there's a part of your brain that's getting damaged because of the alcohol and the effects that the alcohol is having. So when you start drinking to the point where you're blacking out or you're having memory lapses, I personally don't remember ever blacking out. Hey, some of my friends will probably tell you that I did and I can't remember. But I can tell you that there are a lot of times when I can't really remember what happened the night before. And I realize now that that's not a great thing to even admit. But fact of the matter is, a lot of people drink to the point where they can't remember what happened the previous night. And when that happens, It's time to start asking yourself, where am I and what am I doing? And is this the path I want to be on? The second physical sign that I would want to touch on is the shaking and trembling of hands. When you start shaking and trembling because you haven't had a drink all day, ooh, questions, questions, questions. Self examination, or if you see a friend suffering from it, we might be time for some hard conversations. And it's important to keep an open mind when listening to me talk about these things, or when you look around people. Try your best. It's human. We judge. We all judge, and we try not to, but we all judgmental of others. So let's try not to judge when you enter this conversation. Sometimes it's somebody you care about, and you see them falling and failing, and you feel so bad. But because you're feeling bad, you end up putting it on them and making them feel bad when I don't know many people who change their behavior because they've been made to feel bad. They'll probably just dig in their heels and keep doing that because they don't want to feel bad, and it's just easier for them to avoid it. The third physical symptom that I would talk about is the yellowing of the skin or the eyes due to liver damage. Again, when you get to this point, liver cirrhosis is probably kicking in and you need medical attention. Get it. The earlier you do, the better. Gastrointestinal issues like stomach pain, nausea, and vomiting, I can tell you a lot about that because at some point of my addiction, I was very, very inundated by stomach pain. I remember this one time I was walking around. I was at home with my brother and I were just hanging out, and my stomach used to have these bouts, right? Where I would feel like my stomach was on fire. And I would literally walk around and my brother said I looked like a pregnant woman at the time because I was literally walking around rubbing my belly and drinking milk because it felt like my stomach was on fire. And these bouts became more and more common and more familiar to me and more distressing every time they happen, until the first time that I went to the doctor and the doctor told me, you need to cut drinking for a little while. Now, for me, I was like, anything in particular is like beer is the one that's causing that. And so for the next 3 months while I was on a dose of heavy medication, guess what? I was still drinking. I was still drinking spirits because I was told beer is the bad one, right? Not spirits. And this was when my health was at a point where it was causing me distress. And I still didn't get to the point back then of pausing and asking myself if I wanted to keep doing this, if I wanted to keep going there. And so when you start having all of these, and hangovers have the vomiting and the nausea as well. But when it starts getting constant, and when you get them even when you're not drinking, you really need to ask yourself whether alcohol is playing any role into this at this point in time. The fifth one is rational, it's logic, but I'm still going to say it out loud. There are increased risks of accidents and impaired and injuries due to impaired coordination and judgment. While I do not remember blacking out or anything, I can tell you a few times that I fell or missed a step or, hurt myself, or just not a few times. I made reckless decisions very often when I was drunk. And that's because, other than reducing your inhibitions, it impairs your judgment. What we consider fun, or when we say blame it on the alcohol, blame it on the alcohol, you do literally blame it on the alcohol, but you're making decisions that might have impact on yourself and on others when you are under the influence, which at the end of the day truly is not good for you or for anybody else. And honestly, sometimes when I look back at some of those days, I have no idea how I was able to survive through all of that. I think it's just the grace of God, to be quite honest. In Kenya, at least when I was growing up, we have this saying that says the car knows its way home. And that's usually our excuse for you've drunk so much and somehow you got home miraculously without hitting anybody or wrecking your car. And yeah, the car knows its way home. I can drive. It's sort of almost a justification for us to drive drunk. And when those accidents do occur, we victimize people who had nothing to do with the decisions we made. And that's just not right, is it? Yeah. Anyway, Went down a really dark path there just for a little bit, didn't I? Okay, all right. The sixth that I want to mention, I want to be careful when I say this and put it with a caveat. Drastic weight loss and drastic weight gain are both consequences of alcoholism. On one hand, if you're a beer drinker, the calories that are in your average alcohol are just a lot. And so, having a beer gut and all of that and gaining weight, at least I know I gained a lot of weight for a really long time, is a consequence of addiction. But on the other hand, as the disease progresses, weight loss becomes the other factor because you make bad food choices. And as your kidneys and other digestive functions start shutting down, you will start to lose weight because your body is not able to capably handle and in a healthy way accept nutrients or deal with nutrients, and eventually it becomes more of a weight loss than a weight gain situation. So it could be one or the other. Again, weight loss and weight gain can be caused by a myriad of other things. So this has to be in tandem with regular and problematic use of alcohol. All these signs vary from person to person. So again, don't be accusing folks without actually having insight into how they are and how what they're doing. These are just a guide of some things to look out for. It's not comprehensive. And comment below if you've got any other symptoms, physical symptoms that I should be thinking about that we need to discuss. Now, the last category of signs that I want to talk about is emotional and psychological signs. Alcohol does not just affect physical or behavioral. Alcohol affects people emotionally, it impacts mental health. That is why people suffering from mental health issues are a lot more likely to become alcoholics and abuse substances than people who do not have any mental health issues. Emotional well being, alcohol is just a safe place for a lot of us to find refuge, to find peace, to calm our minds. And it does affect, we tend to feel more confident, more brave when we are drunk than we would when we're sober because the lowering of the inhibitions makes us feel like, whoa, I can do this. And you probably have no business doing that, right? So the first of all is mood swings and sudden changes in behavior. So when you see somebody who's been drinking regularly suddenly have mood swings that are really rather extreme, they might be suffering from a mental health condition, but at the same time, it might be an effect of alcohol. Alcohol tends to make us happy for a little bit, and then it gets you, it's actually a depressant. It makes you go a little lower. And that's why you keep drinking because you're looking for that high, that good feeling. You want to feel like, ooh, I'm there and I'm having fun. And it kind of takes you on this roller coaster of emotions that you need to keep an eye out for. And sometimes this is not something you'll catch, to be honest. This is something your friends and your loved ones are probably going to see before you ever realize it. Depression and anxiety, especially when you're not drinking or when you do not have access to alcohol. People who suddenly only puck up and are suddenly the life of the party when they drink, who should be having conversations about addiction and how, and maybe a little bit of self-reflection of why it is you puck up or why it is you're suddenly braver and happier and life of the party when you drink. Why is it that that part of you doesn't feel safe coming out when no alcohol is involved? Isolation or withdrawal from friends and family. When people start realizing there are problems with alcohol, they kind of start want to being all by themselves so that they can drink in peace, right? Because they don't want to be judged. They don't want to be seen as the person who drinks too much in the group. And so this can be a symptom of alcoholism, but can also be a symptom of something else. It can also be just somebody needing help and taking refuge in alcohol because they don't know where else to go. The fourth emotional or psychological sign is the denial of a problem, which is, as I shared with you last week, where I was at some point in time when my friends pointed out that I had a problem. I was like, you don't buy my alcohol. I've never asked you for money to buy alcohol. I don't sleep in your house drunk. So who are you and how dare you tell me I have a problem with alcohol? When that denial becomes so deep rooted or it's always on the defensive, that's a problem. And then, those people who are, they wake up and they have a nasty hangover and they're like, I'm never drinking again, never drinking again. Or they do vocalize to their friends, hey, I really want to quit. I have a problem and I think that it's time for me to quit. And they find themselves going backwards over and over and over again. Those are people who are suffering from addiction, from alcohol addiction, and they need our help and support. Now, alcohol affects, again, these are just some of the symptoms, not all of them. And I've put them into three categories: behavioral, physical, and emotional. I would say behavioral and emotional come before physical because by the time the physical signs start to manifest, as I said earlier, it's really, really gone further down the line than you expect it to. If you or anyone you know is starting to exhibit these signs and symptoms, maybe it's time to have a conversation with yourself and self reflect. And I think it's important to say that sometimes when you're self reflecting, go to people who love you and who you know have got your back and genuinely ask them to give you feedback. They might tell you things that you don't know about yourself. When I first got on the sobriety journey, I had this conversation with a friend of mine who said, you know, Wendy, when you're hanging out with, that the crowd that you're hanging out with, a few times I had people talk about how much you drink. But I never really thought I could come to you and approach you and have that conversation. And it really got me thinking, like, when you're just like, oh my God, that person can really pack it in. Do we stop and think about what that means for us as their friends, but also for them and the impact it might have on them, not just at that time when you're all having fun, but also later, and how much of an effect it's having on their lives for them to indulge as much as they're indulging at that point in time. Are there any symptoms, signs that you think I've missed? Comment on them below. Tell me about it. Let's talk about it. Let's have this conversation on what signs and symptoms we should be looking at. A reminder: alcoholism is a serious disease with serious long term consequences. Recovery is possible. I am living proof, and there's so many people who are on this journey who can tell you that it's possible with the right support and treatment. Next week, I want us to look at the subtypes of alcoholics and explore that topic. And before I wrap up, I think it's important for us to realize that this conversation is only its in infancy. And I'm hoping I'm not the only one who wants to have these conversations. That we as a society, as a culture, globally, not just in Africa, really need to start looking at alcoholism for what it is. Really start examining the costs, the financial costs, the societal costs that alcoholism is having on all of us as people. Because even if you don't drink or you don't imbibe or you feel like your relationship with alcohol is good, I bet you know at least one person or two people who are struggling with having a responsible relationship with alcohol. And I think having these conversations will help us help them and become a better society all around. And I think that's what we all need, being able to be in a place where we can be the best version of ourselves without needing to abuse any substances. And so I hope you've learned something new today. And I'm going to wrap up today's episode by saying thank you for your time. And I'm hoping you've learned something new. If you've enjoyed this episode and you want to keep wondering and wondering with me, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting that notification bell to stay updated for future episodes. It would mean the absolute world to me. Also, please comment if you have thoughts, questions, musings, curiosities. If you want to share your own experiences, drop me a line and let's talk. Let's all be in this together. I will do my best to get back to you on the comment section and address anything that comes up in future episodes. Thank you. And until next time, stay strong, stay blessed, and remember, one step at a time, we'll get there. Enjoy the rest of your week and see you next time. Bye.